Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I want to applaud Aspen Farm Supply for having this meeting. I think every farm supplier in Iowa should have meetings like this just to introduce cover crops to their customers. I've read a lot of studies where farmers probably first go-to person is their agronomist or their CPA, and really that person has a great amount of influence on what a farmer does on his farm as far as practices, nutrient usage, and different things like that. So just thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I live Eagle Grove, just about 65 miles straight south here in Wright County. I first became involved with cover crops in 2011 with NRCS program. It was a Mississippi River Basin Initiative. And the goal of that program is and was to reduce the nitrate loads to the Gulf of Mexico, also phosphorus to some extent. But, unfortunately, the I-states, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, are the biggest source of nutrients leaving the landscape and going into the Mississippi River and ultimately down to the Gulf of Mexico. And the big issue there is the hypoxia zone. We're pretty far removed from it, so we don't think too much about it. But it is an issue. And then in recent years, obviously, you've probably read about the Des Moines waterworks. That's a big question in a lot of people's minds. And it's 3 counties that are northwest of Des Moines that the waterworks is trying to seek regulation, I guess, best way to put it. I think the bottom line is they just want to have the EPA issue a permit to those counties to discharge. They don't care how that's done, but that's their goal. That's been delayed somewhat because the federal judge in Sioux City that's hearing the case has deferred 5 or 6 of the questions of the lawsuit to the Iowa Supreme Court. So that's going to take probably another year. So it's going to go on quite a while. But maybe what will happen. But I think as farmers, we still need to do our part and try to improve things. Part of that is really realizing that there is a problem and that we can do something about it. So today I'd like to share with you some of the things I'm doing on my farm in relation to cover crops. And cover crops have a lot of benefits. It's not just simply putting something out there, but in terms of water quality, it's a great benefit. In terms of protecting your soil, it's a great benefit. And also the soil health, which is maybe a little bit harder to quantify right now, but I know there's a lot of groups and organizations trying to quantify that and see what those benefits are and put an economic value on that. I'm involved with a project with the National Corn Growers Soil Health Partnership, which we're doing that exact thing. It's a 5-year program where we're taking soil samples, extensive soil samples, and putting input in terms of our costs and so forth. And they're using a lot of university people trying to put some numbers on these things. So I think in future years we're going to see some results of that and really see the benefits of it. So with that, I'll get started. Just curious, anybody's birthday today? 29th? There we go. I heard this morning on the radio that 4% of the population have their birthday on February 29th, which is obviously a late year. But anyway. Thinking back, this was probably taken in the late 50s. This is the corn crib we used to have. But think about change. Think about the things we used to do that we don't do anymore. The corn crib, obviously, shelling corn. That was our dryer. We would put shell or ear corn in there to dry and to store it. The tractor, obviously, is quite a change from what we have today. I still have that tractor. We started with a flywheel, spun the flywheel around. I remember starting that quite a few times. But that was the farm I live on. The crib's gone now, the barn's gone now, so a lot of changes have taken place. Whoops, this is not too far. Okay. So this was fast forward another 20 years. This was early 70s, and had a lot of wind erosion in the 60s. We mowed or plowed, everything, all the residue was covered up. And there was a reason we did that. My dad did that. Obviously, have equipment that would go through the residue like it will today. So we plowed everything. And unfortunately, there was wind erosion would also bring a lot of soil erosion. I remember when my dad sold this to a neighbor, probably in 72, somewhere in there, 73 maybe. He says, how are you going to farm without a plow? You know, obviously that was a standard implement on any Iowa farm in the early 70s. This was our solution, a chisel plow. We had used that chisel plow for soybean ground, and then decided, you know, that would probably work on the corn ground. So, of course, we had to cut stalks, and we disc it. We had to do a few things to get this to work, but we made it work. And then a few years later, Glencoe came out with a soil saver, and a version of that is really the common tool we use today, a disc chisel. You know, that's something that will slice through the residue and do a little tillage and so forth. Well, today, this is what I do. And of course, that's quite a ways away from where we're plow. In fact, this picture was taken about 30 feet from where that plow was sitting probably 40 years earlier. Cereal rye, strip till, this little bit I actually no-tilled. But who would have ever thought that this would be a site 2 or 3 weeks before planting time in an Iowa farm field? Okay, I've got this is seeding sewer rye for the first time on my phone. Using cover crops, you want to manage it like you do your cash crops. You know, are the soil conditions right? Or is there rain in the forecast? You know, if you're going to use aerial seeding, there are other things you can use. But with the airplane here, I just have a shot. You can see right here, there's is where it comes out. The tank sits at the head of the pilot, it drops down, goes out. Seeds about 60 feet. With this plane, I had another plane this past summer, and I think he seeded 8 foot wide. Had a lot bigger plane, but it doesn't take long. I think they did 300 acres in just a few hours, maybe 3 or 4 hours. That's flying back to the airport, loaded up, coming back. I typically seed about a bushel an acre with aerial seeding. Some people might go a little higher, depending on what your uses are. If you have some cattle, you're going to graze. That's a consideration. You might seed a little bit heavier, but that's a good place to start. Pretty good rule of thumb. Another method is ground seeding. This is Hagee's machine. They developed 3 or 4 years ago. They took their spray tank off and put an air tank on in place of that, and they run air hoses down to the boom. The nice thing about this, you can drop the seed below the canopy in a cornfield, and we also did some below the ground or below the canopy in soybeans. The soybeans, again, you have to kind of watch what the conditions are. This past year probably won't work very well. 2 years ago worked real well because the canopy wasn't filled in. But one thing about the ground seeding, some damage going through the field, but if your corn is standing good, if your beans aren't lodged, this is a good alternative to get some seeding done also. If there's questions along the way, I think we have enough time. Stick your hand up and I'll try to answer, but I think we have enough time that I can stop here and there and talk about some of these things. Doesn't look like much. Yeah, go ahead.
What's your timing on that?
I typically seed late August or early September. When I first started, they talked about the soybeans being, yellow, maybe 3/4 yellow, leaves starting to drop. The issue there is you can't always get the pilot when you want him because he's too busy. The first year I waited and thought, well, I'll wait till just the right time. And he went up to northwest Iowa and was doing other work, and he came back and did maybe a little bit later than I wanted to. But I guess I'm of the opinion it's good to get it on the ground. If you think there's going to be moisture coming, get it there. The downside is sunlight hitting the ground. If it's really a thick canopy, that seed will germinate, but it does need some sunshine. So it is a kind of timing issue. In some ways, seeding corn is a little bit easier than soybeans if you have a real thick canopy because of the light issue. Some species are more sensitive to that. The rye, I think, does pretty well with just a limited amount of light, but eventually you got to get that light on that plant to get it to grow, otherwise it's pretty expensive. But once those leaves start dropping, that rye is going to start doing something. And it's a little bit hard to see here, but it doesn't look like much in the fall when you first seed it. But that seed does tiller out springtime. One seed might have 7 or 8 tillers coming up. Be like oats or any small grain. You're kind of depending on that tilling, but it does thicken up and it does fill in pretty good. This is in the corn. Again, I think sometimes the corn looked better because there was more sunlight getting to the ground and helping out. So this was seeded early September of 2011. And this is following spring. This is my first cover crop season. I've got some strips in there for the strip till. The rye is starting to get some size to it here. It's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 inches tall. One thing about the rye, and I guess with any cover crop, we often judge it by what we see above ground, but in reality what's important is what is below ground. And those roots are very fibrous, they go very deep. I think I might have used a spade to loosen these up, but I left a lot of roots behind. Obviously I didn't take them all, but a lot of roots there. And when you talk about soil health, that's what the roots equate to soil health, because all those microbes will fix on those roots. And I guess this may be a good place to talk about that, because you think of a corn soybean crop that we raise in Iowa, typically we seed late April, early May, and probably late August that crop is starting to die. September, it's losing its green, it's starting to fade away. And the beauty of the cover crop is we're adding more living plants to the landscape before that takes place in the springtime, and also afterwards in the fall when we've taken the crop off. So we've added another probably 60 days, maybe a little bit longer, depending on the year. I think this year will be a good year because the snow's gone and the temperatures are warming up. My cover crop growth is probably going to be pretty good this spring, because hopefully we'll get some warm days in March and we'll get some good growth into April. So but these roots are what all those microbes are fixing them. And I don't understand all that, but I know it's very important. There's scientists that research that. And I used to think that we would spread fertilizer out on the ground or in the soil, mix it in, and the roots of the plants would just go to that. That's not what takes place. The microbes in the soil actually mobilize the nutrients so the plants can use them. Without that microbial action, the fertilizer, the commercial fertilizer we put out there, and even with livestock manure, those microbes are what make nutrients available to the plant. So that's why soil health is so important. This is that same field from a different angle. This rye is probably 6 to 7 inches tall. field between the corn rows, you can kind of see a little pattern there, and I think that's due to the corn plant before it was harvested, probably caused some of that rye to fall more between the rows, and that's one of the advantages of using like a drop system with a hay or a ground seeding. It'll get it more distributed all across there. And I don't want to say that's a problem, but what you can see, there's not so much rye there, it's more between the rows. But that's part of it because of the way that the rye hit the ground, because of the leaf canopy and the corn.
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you experimented with different rates? Is the rate that important, or is it the growing conditions that really establish your crop?
I think it's the growing conditions. I've just stuck with that one bushel. Some farmers might use a bushel and a half. I've heard some use two, maybe about graze. Obviously, that has a cost. I've been paying around $13 a bushel for rye. Last year it was cheaper. I think it was around 10 or 11. If you had a semi wanting to go out to Nebraska or South Dakota, you could probably get it for half that. I don't know. But the co-op charges to go get it. They handle it and so forth. So,
It looked like you had a pretty thick.
yes, it does thicken up, right. So that was a bushel an acre, so I haven't tried it with every. And I am still learning all this, even though I've done it for 4 or 5 years. I seeded my 5th crop last fall, but it's a learning process. And I guess the key is, if you're thinking about it, get started. Do 40 acres or 80 acres or 160 acres. I did 300 acres to start with, but that's the way you learn. I think kind of get your feet wet. Just get out there and try it. This was late March at 2012. It does get going pretty fast. You get warm days like a corn. Corn really takes off in June. When you get those hot days and it hits a certain stage, and the growth really accelerates. I used to get my planter out the first thing every spring, but now I get my sprayer out the first thing every spring. So you want to have your sprayer hooked up, you want to have it ready to go, or have your farm supplier, whoever's going to do your custom spraying, be in good communication with them, let them know what you're doing, because timing is real important, conditions are very important. In the springtime, temperature is very important. If it gets too cool, you don't want to be spraying. Ideally, a warm day is the best day to spray. Okay, a little bit about the economics. Everybody asks, does it pay? I guess I can't say, well, if you plant a bushel of rye and cover crop, that you're going to make another $50 an acre, $25 an acre, $10 an acre. It's a lot of little things. We think about things we do in farming. We might put a machine shed up, we might put a drying system up, we might buy a piece of machinery. And I could ask you, does that pay? And over time, you say yes. I can take care of my machinery, I can protect the value of my machinery. That drying system, first year, probably not going to pay. Over 5 or 10 years, yes, it will pay very well. And cover crops, I believe, are that same idea. Long term, we're helping our soil quality, we're helping protect our soil. And I think something that's going to come to agriculture, well, it already has, and that we're going to have to face is the environmental side of things. And whether we believe it's a problem or not, we're going to be looking at having to change the way we do things a little bit. And cover crops are one of those things that may be on the horizon. But anyway, we did take biomass samples. We simply took a 12-inch by 12-inch PVC square and threw it out, clipped all the residue above ground, and that was dried, and it was analyzed. And now 800 pounds is not a lot when you think in terms of a hay crop or a forage crop or something like that. But at this stage, which is about as far as you want to let it get, maybe if you're going to plant corn after this. But that 8 to 10 inches of rye contained about a little over 30 pounds of nitrogen. Now that nitrogen, depending on the size of the residue, the rye, will release that following season. It won't release right away, it will release later in the season. So that N is stored in the organic matter or the carbon in the soil. I've also learned that there's probably a 1-to-1 ratio, maybe a 1 another 30 pounds in the roots. Obviously, you can't measure that because they cannot get the roots out of the soil to measure that. So, and the bigger the crop gets, the more nutrients that will uptake. But as the rye gets bigger, there's a trade-off. As the rye gets bigger, it will be slower to release. It may not all release in that same year. So. But a few years ago, 50 cents a pound, 30 pounds was worth $15 an acre. So in some of the slides I'll show you later, nitrates do indeed leave my farm, and I'm assuming most farms in Iowa through time. So on the economic side of things, there is a value in keeping that nitrogen on your farm. Okay, with termination, you want to see some days that are 50 degrees and above, ideally 60 to be better. It takes about 2 weeks for this to die. Now, if I sprayed this in June, it probably died in 3 or 4 days. It's not hard to kill on a warm day, but when it's cooler, it is more difficult because the plant slows down, kind of shuts down. It's intense to protect itself in that respect. I use glyphosate, just a standard rate. You want to do a good job of spraying as far as using an AMS or whatever label suggests. But it's not hard to do, but this was probably 10 days after I sprayed, and I was really concerned it was going to die and whether I would need to spray it again. And I took some pictures and I sent them to some people that maybe had some answers, and they said give it three days more, and I did, and it was all brown in 3 days after. Okay, this is planting in that same spot where that real green picture was taken about 6, 7, 8 slides ago. But the dust is flying, and the rye is really flimsy at this stage. There's not an issue with planting or equipment. I did add floating row cleaners on my planter. Getter makes a floating row cleaner. It's got little bands on the side, sharp tooth. Instead of having a fixed row cleaner that might tend to go too deep, the floating ones just really are sitting right where they need to be. I think the rule of thumb is 2 weeks ahead of your anticipated planting date, but I know not so much last year, but 2 years prior with all the wet weather we had, it was more difficult to do that. I know some growers that sprayed it one day and planted it next, and they did not have any issues. Just kind of a contrast, I turned around, took a picture the other direction, but neighbor across the field, I think that was probably worth twice the field elevator. Now, in a year like last year in our situation, our rainfalls were 1/2 inch, 3/4, 1/2 inch, not a big deal. I think our heaviest rainfall last year was 1.5 inches at a time. 2 years prior, in 2013 and 2014, I had, you probably did too, rainfall events that had anywhere from 10 to 14 inches in a 2-week time frame. That does a lot of damage on your soil, even fairly flat ground like that. Every time a raindrop hits the soil, it has potential to take soil with it. Now, you may have a tabletop level farm, but that's the exception rather than the rule. Water runs. If water goes somewhere, it has potential to take soil with it. So I become very conscious, I guess, about soil loss, trying to keep the soil on my farm, but obviously using residue does make a difference. It slows that rainfall down. It does help prevent soil erosion.
Hey, Tim?
Yes.
You got any experience planting into that green cover? I mean, I'm spraying it after you plant.
I've got some slides, just not too far here. Sorry. Yes.
Are there strips in there? Is that strips with the rye coming through, or is this?
The strips are where I did my strip till pass previous fall.
Right, but they are there. They're just.
It does throw it out a little bit. I was concerned when I did do the strip till that I might be damaging because my first year with that strip till bar, I didn't have a very good closer disc behind it, and it kind of threw the soil out. I wanted to turn this upside down, but this is how it looked the next spring. I did replace those discs with a kind of keep better form far as seeing everything, I think I had to understand. This is just a picture where I didn't strip till, planting soybeans into this. You can see the rye is pretty flimsy. It really wasn't an issue. It just those road cleaners just kind of push it off a little bit. And of course, with soybeans, you get a half inch of soil over them. They're good to go. You know, you can plant into things that you didn't think you could plant into. As this shows. Now, this is a friend of mine in Humboldt County, and they had a little more rainfall than we did last spring. And you might say, well, is he stuck? Or what's going on up there? But this is the 2nd of June. Now, he would normally plant a month earlier, but it's a wet farm, a wet field. He had trouble getting out there. It's not tiled. He wasn't sure what he was going to do with that rye. That rye is about as tall as a tractor hood. He did spray it, and he went ahead and planted. He thought about maybe having a neighbor chop it for 4 acres or something like that. But he decided to plant into it. So he's planting soybeans. I would not recommend this for corn, but soybeans we're going to talk about here. Corn, you would definitely have issues if this was a scenario. But he's planting his corn. He's got a 16-year-old planter, I think, there, and he stopped, took a picture. So, see what happened. Well, after he planted, he had a neighbor roll it down, a smooth roller, not a crimper, but just to lay the rye down. And this is his bean stand. And he was happy with it. He felt he had good burdens and had a good stand. But obviously, there's a lot of residue from the rye. So how did it do? Well, this is what it looked like, I don't know, midsummer, I guess. He planted, like I say, the 2nd of June, so this is a month later, a little bit later maybe, but I guess what I want you to take away here is he didn't have to put in post-emergent herbicide. Economically, what's a post-emergent herbicide cost? $15 an acre, give or take. So he saved that cost. He did watch it all summer. He was planning on spraying. There's water hemp in this field. If he hadn't, if he farmed it conventionally, he would have weed issues. He did spray around the perimeter of the field because the pilot was not able. Typically, they're a little more careful around the borders because they don't want to get the rye on the neighbor's field that might not want it. But anyway, he had a real clean field, and he was very happy with it. So how did it yield? He told me, well, he's also got a Twitter account that I follow. I talked to him. He said, 58 bushels an acre. I planted this the 2nd of June. Now that's probably 2 weeks later than, in a minimum, maybe 3 weeks later than he normally would plant it. So, the yield issue might have been a little bit of a planting issue. But as far as weed control and yield, that's a respectable yield, I think. It's probably better than we've had in the past few years. I have seen low 60s, mid 60s, but I planted mine probably in the first week of May. Of course, we're counting apart. It's not a side-by-side file, but just to point out that if this is a system you're thinking about, and as you get comfortable with it, now I think Doug is probably going to let that rye get a little bit bigger even. I'm going to do that myself prior to planting soybeans, primarily for weed control. It does suppress weeds. So he thought it might be an issue harvest. It was not an issue harvest. By harvest time, that rye is very brittle, very flimsy. But he was able to strip till through it. Didn't have any issues with that either. So I guess I show you that to show that there is potential, I think, as we get more confidence in doing this and get trying different things. Go ahead.
Did he fall seed cover crop back into that field?
I believe so. Doug Adams, he's NRCS. He works at NRCS, but he also farms in South Humboldt there. But anyway, if you want to follow him on Twitter, I think here's his Twitter account, FarmerDoug93. But you can go on, and he shows a lot of things like this that he's doing through the season. And I think if you wanted to just show you some potential, I think, and again, economically, there's potential another $15 an acre. I want to mention also, he did kind of a cost analysis with the passes that he made on this field, using Iowa State custom rate charges, and the strip till and what he did here probably showed a $15 advantage to just chisel and field till rate pass. So, you know, there is economics, I think, that lend themselves to favor cover crops. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're okay. Another thing I'm doing on my farm, I guess, nutrient management practices. I try to put my nitrogen on side dress and pre-plant, or also I have done all side dress. I think it is important from the past few years to have nitrogen down before you plant. This year I'm planning on about 50% of it pre-plant, and then I'm going to use 50% side dress for a wide drop system. I'm working with Jason Opine, who works with this organization, but he's got his high clearance sprayer set up for wide drops. Put that nitrogen UAN right along the base of the plant, so I'm about 160, 170 acres that way this spring.
Tim, do you,
Yes.
with your cover crops, do you feel like you manage nutrients a little bit differently as far as the timing and what you put on when? Do you think that's important, especially with the cereal rye?
I guess one thing with the strip till, it probably lends itself more with the strip till process, but I do have a Concord air cart that I can pull behind my strip till bar and put my P&K on in the furrow. I have grass cap stood on top, so you know, there's a lot of different ways of doing it. I think the big thing is probably with the nitrogen management. I'm going to use probably 3 sources this year. I'm going to use AMS and then some DAP to pre-plant, and then I'm going to put some UAN on pre-plant, and then I'm going to use 32% side dress. But last year I did do hydrous pre-plant in the strip, and that worked real well. So there's a lot of options, I think, as far as nitrogen. For me, it's I've gotten away from fall application. I know logistically, time-wise, you know, that's a big plus to a lot of farmers, because they like to just have it on because they want to get started spring planting in the spring. But if you have a lot of acres, you know, you don't have to do all your acres this way, but maybe start trying some different things. And you know, I think the key is being more efficient with what we're doing. I think we're going to get to the point where we can't just put an extra 50 pounds on just because it's a safe margin of safety for our yields. I think we have to apply it more precisely, not only in rate, but also time. We can be more efficient with time. Obviously, when is the corn crop due that nitrogen? It's June, July, August. It's not April, May. And unfortunately, that's when a lot of the nitrogen loss takes place. Yes?
Have you cut your main rates at all?
I haven't, but I'm not adding, and my goal is to reduce. I have done nitrogen rate trials where I put a normal rate on, say 140 pounds, and cut 40 pounds off, say 100 pounds. And the yield really wasn't that much different. The yield difference was offset by the cost of nitrogen. And when you consider that definitely margin even less, anything 100 pounds, you know, this sounds, why would anyone only put 100 pounds on it? We have a lot of mineralization in our soils that takes place, and you know, that's where probably a good share of nitrogen is coming from. I'll show some slides on that a little bit later, but my goal is to fine tune it. So, and I don't completely understand the release with the cover crops, you know, how much that nitrogen is going to release. And it's not an exact science because it's based on moisture, temperature, the species, the amount of material there, a lot of variables. But our approach has been over the years, and if you go back 20 years, they said, well, if you want 120 or 150 pounds, 150 bushels of yield, you put 1.2 pounds of nitrogen on per yield, bushel yield goal. Realistically, probably 7/10 0.7 to 0.75 pounds of nitrogen to bushel yield goal is more realistic. Last year I had 210 bushel corn with 140 pounds of nitrogen. So I think it's something with yield monitors and the way we can do comparisons in the field. I think it's important for each farmer to find out what that sweet spot is for his own farm. So the other tool we can use is the late spring nitrate test in soil and yield 360. I think everybody that handles those has got those machines now. So actually, if you've got a supplier you're working with, they can do those nitrate samples in-house within a few hours probably when you take those samples. And you'll know what your soil's having for nitrogen, and then you can adjust accordingly as far as what you need to put on. Tissue samples of the corn plant, that's a little bit harder to, I don't know if we know as much doing that. It does give you a little snapshot of that corn plant, what it has and what it's taken up. But I think with a tissue sample, you can probably take one every week, and it's going to be, it's going to vary. But, obviously, grid sampling, I think a lot of people have been doing for years anyway. So, but just to know what's out there in the soils, what do we need to put on? Do we need to put a lot on, or do we have medium to high testing soils? Does it pay, especially in the economic times like we're facing now? Does it pay to put that P&K out there? Is it going to give a return? As far as the nutrient management, another thing I think helps a lot is the late summer stalk nitrate test. After the corn is black layered, take a section of stalk out, maybe take a dozen of those plants, and then that consists of a sample. It doesn't tell you, it's not going to help you any for that season. That crop is done, but it does kind of give you a snapshot of what you have done. If you've got extremely high levels of nitrates in your corn plants, you can probably cut back on your nitrogen use. If they're in that optimal range, that's obviously where you want to be. And if they're low, obviously it may have paid you to put more nitrogen on. I have had nitrate samples in my stalks that were very low, but the yields were very good. And what happened there was the plant ran out of nitrogen when the plant died. The example being crossing the finish line and running out of gas. That's exactly what happened. But I don't know of any Indy racer that would want to run out of gas right at the finish line. So, and some have done it right before the finish line, and it cost them a race. And obviously, a farmer doesn't want to do that either. But again, it's just, what's our goal? What do we have as an objective as far as our nutrients? Something I'm doing, and I think it's available to just about anybody that wants to do it. If you can get to your tile, obviously I have a stream going through my farm, so I have outlets. And if you don't have that, you have to dig down, and that isn't always practical. But to a tile, you get those samples. But anyway, and this is where I really started learning about what was going on with my tile, what was going on in my fields in terms of nutrient loss, nitrate loss. And it really woke me up a little bit to what was going on. And then I also have a written management plan if you deal with NRCS. And I don't know if that would be a commonplace thing with agriculture, but it takes into account your soil types, your slopes, your fields, your fertility levels, and really it's based on university recommendations where you ought to be. And it's just, again, it's just a good guideline. It's good management, I think. This is the Iowa State University. They have an extension website, MRTN, maximum return to nitrogen, and most profitable N rate. And you can input the price of corn, price of your nitrogen. I think here it was 50 cents a pound. I had $5.75. This was a few years ago. But the sweet spot for that year at that price was 140 pounds of nitrogen per acre. The range was 129 to 151, and that falls within this area right here. You can put more nitrogen on, and you can get higher yields, but you can you can change the price of corn. It's amazing. It really doesn't change too much. With lower price corn, it might drop down to 130, maybe 132 for the economic return on rate per acre. But you know that website's really easy to use. Strip till, this is seeded with a floater in 2012. 2012 was a drought year. We took the crop off 2 weeks earlier. Ground was very dry. I thought I didn't want to put that seed out there, the cover crop seed, and not have it grow, so I decided to wait. And so I took the soybeans off, and we spread dry fertilizer, and put the tender the spreader had 2 compartments, put rye seed in one, fertilizer in there. I think they can also blend it in. I know farmers that blend the rye seed with fertilizer and spread it that way. But that worked good too. And with corn, the corn came off early. So this rye was seeded probably early October, maybe the 5th or 10th of October. It really depends on the year. If you have some warm days, you can seed in October and still get it to germinate. If you use cereal rye, it will still grow in the spring, and you'll still get benefit from that cover crop. My goal is to get it seeded earlier. I think you get more benefit from it seeded earlier. But again, it's just one of those management decisions. You think, well, the conditions are right, so I'm going to hold off. So, whether it's planting corn or beans in the spring, it's too dry. I mean, typically we don't wait, but in years past we might have waited till we got a rain, or obviously in the recent years we had to wait till it dries out. But just kind of a bird's eye view of the cover crop. I think this is just rye growing here, but and I haven't. I guess the strip don't pass. I was doing on the other side, right over there. So, but anyway, it's kind of different species. This was oats and radish and hairy vetch, seeded into soybeans. This was 2014, I believe. 2014 was a very rough year. My soybeans did not canopy completely. Fill in the row. It was a good year to do this. Oat growth got to be pretty good. Hairy vetch didn't do too much. The radishes did pretty good. Just talking a couple pounds an acre with the radish, and I'm not sure on the rate with the hairy vetch. There's probably, I'm thinking a bushel maybe of oats, maybe a little more, bushel and a half per acre. That was seeded with an airplane. Here's the mix again. And the question is, well, how does that harvest? Those oats are really flimsy. They just lay down. I might have cut some of them off. Not a harvest issue. Some of those stems may have gone through the combine. If you're just getting started with cover crops and you don't want to terminate in the spring, oats are a good choice. Especially if this was going to corn, so using oats and soybeans before corn. Nothing to contend with in the spring. First freeze, oats die, they wilt away, you really don't see anything of them. It's not an advantage in terms of soil conservation, but as far as just trying to cover crop, and oat mix is a good place to start. And from a water quality standpoint, oats probably give 90% of the nitrate sequestering that cereal rye might, 80 to 90%. So oats are a good choice also. This is that tillage radish. This would have been seeded late August, early September, but had some pretty good growth on it. Of course, that taproot will grow off. That taproot probably kept on going, down there. They're very fine. When we think of tillage radish, we think of the big fat ones, like this one. This was planted in some drought areas I had in 2014. I didn't want to just let that area sit without anything growing. I thought this was an excellent opportunity. I did seed oats and radish. I seeded in one area. I seeded rye and radish in another area. And in the third area, I just seeded the radish. The issue here is herbicides. Now I used Optil Pro, I think. This was in a soybean field, and it was the only thing I did to test was I thought the radish was the most sensitive seed, so I took a garden seeder and I seeded some radish just in a small area in the drown-out spot to see it will germinate before I see it in the whole area. And the radish came up, so I thought, well, this is good, so I'll just go ahead and seed it. But I had very little rye come up, and then when I see the oats did not come up either. So herbicide carryover is an issue when you're seeding cover crops. Iowa State has got some sheets out, I think, on herbicides that you want to be concerned about in terms of carryover. I think Practical Farmers of Iowa has a sheet also, and I think there's been some work done at the University of Pennsylvania. But if you want cover crop success, there are probably some herbicides that may affect a cover crop seeding in the fall, that if you use those in the spring for your cash crop. So keep that in mind, I guess, when you're planting cover crop. This is just a handful of soil, probably hard to read, but humankind, despite its many accomplishments, owes its existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil. In fact, we tend to take our soil for granted. As farmers, we just assume it's always going to be there. But unfortunately, over the last 150 years, I think on average in Iowa, we've probably lost 6 inches of topsoil. I've read studies and talked to listened to people that we probably had 14 inches of topsoil on average in 150 years old before this land was settled and before it was started to be farmed. And now it's probably about 8 inches on average. Declaring soil profiles, I know in some areas, if the soil people went out today to classify those soils, would probably not classify them as declaring soils because they look so different. Not in every case, but there are definitely cases where that's true. So I think it behooves us to care for our soil. It's obviously, if you own it, you don't want to lose it. If you rent it, your landlords probably care about it. And I think in time that may even be should be a part of a farmer's business plan to approach landlords on the aspect that I can protect your soil, I can take care of your soil. Now, it's not just keeping the weeds out, keeping the fertility up and mowing the ditches. It's making sure that soil stays in place for that landlord.
How long have you been strip tilling?
5 years.
So roughly 4 or 5 years on the strip till and the cover crop?
Yes.
And you were conventional till before that?
Just chiseled. In the 90s, I did do ridge tilling for about 10 years. And then,
I'm assuming your soil didn't look like that before you started the strip and the cover crop?
well, probably not. It was still, this is in a strip till area, so I'm not going to say that this wasn't tilled, but I am protecting it with cover in the other areas. But my goal really is to move towards no tillage, I think. From an economic standpoint, I did a study with Iowa Soybean this past year, did a strip plow with on farm network, did 4 replications, strip till and no till in soybeans. And I think I had a bushel and a half advantage to strip till. Now, a bushel and a half at $8, $9 probably is about a cost of, when you consider the cost of strip till pass. So that's kind of a wash there, but I think the longer you do cover crops and strip till, the sooner you can move, the faster you can move towards a no-till situation. And I know the question is, it's too wet, it's too cold. Well, don't do it on everything, try it and get used to it. Prove the concept. And that's kind of what I've been doing the last 5 years, improve the concept. I didn't do it on all my acres. My home farm is 400 acres. That's where I've done most of my work, but now I'm doing it on the other farms also. So some farmers would want to do everything the same way, but something new, typically you want to maybe try it this, talk to a lot of people. You need to be confident what you're doing before you do it. You may have an idea, and well, it's like a good idea. But every year that goes by, it's just, you gotta wait another season, you gotta wait another season. So, at some point in time, if you want to try it, I guess I would just encourage you to go ahead and try it. But our soil is important, it's, and we do depend on it. We've got too much corn and too many soybeans. And obviously, you've seen places like this. This is across the road from me. He farms down the slope. It's a long slope. And it looks like this about every spring. And the ditch is full. And the only good about this picture is all that soil comes to my field. And I don't really wish that on anybody, but that's the case. It's seen too often. Just a kind of an illustration for thought. It's pretty well accepted that the average soil loss is around 5 tons per acre, 10,000 pounds. In 2014, the average corn yield was 178 bushels per acre, a little bit higher than that last year. Just so happens that 178 bushels is 10,000 pounds. So it's not too hard to, every pound of corn we raise, we lose a pound of soil. And then you think, how long can we keep doing that? Now, it may not affect us, it may not affect your children, it may not affect your grandchildren, but someday, that soil is there, it's going to affect future generations. The reason we can keep losing soil is because we still have good soil underneath. But we were down to the last good inch of topsoil. We've kind of gone past the point of no return. This tile I took is connected to my bioreactor. This was taken about a year before I got the bioreactor installed. But the reason I took it, that tile did not flow for about 9 months prior, because it was dry from July all the way until March. And we had about 8 inches of rain that spring. I think it was 2012. 2012. From late March to early May, we had about 8 inches of rain. The tile started flowing again. But it got me thinking about water leaving my farm, literally falling from the sky, percolating through the soil, leaving my tile, going into the stream, and flowing down to Des Moines, passing Des Moines waterworks, and ultimately down to the Gulf of Mexico. But it looks pretty clean. It's like you put a glass under there, take a nice cool drink out of there. Probably wouldn't hurt you. Used to be, we were kind of concerned about herbicides, but I think we shifted things the way we do in terms of herbicides. But unfortunately, that water does have nitrates in it. The nitrates aren't a big issue for healthy people. The issue comes in for elderly and for babies. And that's another discussion, but the EPA level for nitrates in water is 10 parts per million and 10 milligrams per liter. So this is a graph I got from Dr. Matt Helmers at Iowa State. I think it really illustrates kind of what's taking place in our fields. And I'm going to take just a little bit of time to explain this to you. There is a lot of native organic matter. Again, that's why our soils are so productive as organic matter. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of our organic matter just because of tillage and erosion. Tillage burns up carbon. It oxidizes our soil, so to speak, and it releases carbon. But it also, a lot of our nitrogen comes here. So we've got, I think I've heard maybe 10,000 pound potential in the soil profile of nitrogen. We don't use all that, obviously, and it doesn't all release. But because of the carbon, the rich soil we have, is a nitrogen source. Okay, this green line is corn and soybean uptake. Now this is March, April, May, or March, February, whatever, progresses down. So this is the timeline for corn and soybean uptake for nutrients. Unfortunately, the production with the soil organic matter and some of what we add is right here. Now another part of that picture, which is not on here, is our rainfall typically is heaviest right in here. And then later the season drops off. This area here is typically, there's no crop crop to take it up, but it is available. And that is potential loss right in that time period, and it's also potential loss here. Now, something that we don't have on our landscapes anymore, and that's part of the beauty of a cover crop. We used to have small grains. In the early 50s, I think was probably a peak in Iowa of usage of small grains, that being oats. Alfalfa is not a small grain, but we had more rotation in our system. We've taken that out of our system. The small grains is not there anymore. But a cover crop can help uptake some of those nutrients during that time frame, both early and later in the season. So that is why cover crops are such a benefit to water quality and help keep those nitrates in the soil. But where we used to have 7 million acres of oats in Iowa, we replaced those with soybeans. And I've seen several studies, well, one in particular, looking at nitrate loss, and it was in the Raccoon River Basin of the area that's getting sued by the waterworks. But as those oats were removed out of the rotations and substituted with soybeans, is also the nitrate levels started increasing and getting up to where they are today. But that's again, the beauty of a cover crop is taking those nitrates up during that lull, for lack of a better term, where there's no crop out there. I've seen other graphs where about mid-July the nitrate availability is there, and then it just drops right down because that's the corn crop is there, and it's taking that nitrogen out of the soil. So this is the nitrate sampling that was done on my farm with the bioreactor. Part of the bioreactor installation was water monitoring, and the goal of that was to determine the effectiveness of the bioreactor, so we take a sample of the field before it flows into the bioreactor, and then we take a sample of the water after it's left the bioreactor. So these levels, there's nitrate levels. This is time. So through the season, March through December 2011, I didn't have my bioreactor installed, and I didn't have any cover crops in place the fall of 2010, and I did put my nitrogen on at that time, fall applied nitrogen. So these are points that were taken upstream for me and downstream for me. One was Boone River, down by River City. Okay, this next one is my farm, the red dots are my farm. So that's where I was at. So you can see where I was compared to the water that was flowing through that creek to my farm. So I was above that. So I put a cover crop in. This was my first season with cover crop right here in September. And then I didn't put my nitrogen on until next spring, or next cycle season. Now 2012 was a drought year. It was predicted there would be, this was the nitrate level, peaked about 25 in the stream in 2012. So it went up from here to here. My levels went down actually. So this was probably around 13, 14, and this was 25, 24, 25. Not quite half, but you can see it. I think my cover crops did make a difference that I seeded in here. I put another cover crop here, and then I did install my bioreactor this time in September. 2012 was a drought year, and it was predicted that there would be a lot of nitrates left in the soil, but the corn crop did not take it up. And that was the case. Nitrate levels in the stream went up to 30, quite a bit higher from here, so it's kind of a trend up. Again, that depends on rainfall, depends on a lot of things, but that year it really peaked out. So what's going to happen here with red dots? So I went up a little bit. I had the same drought everybody else did, but mine did not go up quite as much. This was probably around 15. This is about 30. So, and then they taper off as the season goes on. Put my bioreactor in. These brown dots of the bioreactor. Inflow, outflow. It did take a few weeks for that bioreactor to get going because it was dry when we installed it. There was no water flowing in the tile. Once the water started bacteria, they're denitrifying bacteria, and they started going to town and they denitrified that water in my field. So I dropped, quite a bit. This past spring, we did samples. My tile water flowing in this past spring was just a little over 10, and then leaving the bioreactor was just a little over 5. So the bioreactors do a good job of removing nitrates. The issue there is my bioreactor filters about 40 acres. You can size it bigger. You could probably go up to 80 acres, but that's probably a limitation on a bioreactor. They are a tool to use. There's a cost of those. The useful life of bioreactors is estimated to about 15 years. This is just a picture of what this is. It's 110 foot long. It's 10 foot wide. It's about 5 foot deep. The depth is determined by your tile. It's just a little bit deeper, maybe 6 inches deeper than my tile flowing in. And then the flows into one end. There's perforated tile that brings the water into the bioreactor. And there'll be another perforation tile that takes it away and lets it go out the other end. These are control structures. They're made here in Iowa by Agri-Domain. This one has 3 ports. This one has 2. This is the inlet side. If you get a lot of rain and the tiles are really flowing, it can just bypass. So the bioreactor does not slow down the tile flow. And the flow is determined by stop gates. There's a long T-handle that you can lower those, push those down to the bottom, or you can lift them up. You can change the level of the bioreactor. You can control the flow by using those stop gates that are inside of that. It's made out of heavy-duty PVC and aluminum. Those are $800, $900 a piece, depending on the size. That's a part of the cost of the bioreactor. The bioreactor cost around $7,500. That was cost shared with NRCS. Iowa Soybean Association picked up the balance, so for me it didn't cost me anything. But it is an effective tool, I think, to help with the nitrate issue. Here's wood chips being dumped in, had a walking floor in the semi, and they just back it up and pile them up in the Caterpillar, just smooth them out, pack them. And then we put a geofabric over that, and then we just took that soil over that, just put it over the top. You can drive on it, you can farm over. This is in a filter strip along the stream, so it really doesn't take any land out of production. You could put them in a fence line if you don't have a stream going through your farm. You could probably put those control structures right along the fence so it would not interfere with your cropping system. I probably wouldn't farm over, but you could. But it's a pretty small footprint. It's probably 0.002 an acre. I mean, it's not a big deal. I had 125 cubic yards of wood chips. Wood chips are about $15 a cubic yard, so that's probably half the cost of bioreactor. And in 15 years, I can either just forget it and it won't work. What happens is carbon source gets used up and becomes ineffective. Or I can take that topsoil off, excavate out the wood chips. The control structures would remain in place. Really need a time of doing the backhoe work and the cost of wood chips to replace that. So my guess it would not cost maybe half of what it costs to build it. Kind of what they look like. Nice uniform size. I think there were some bioreactors installed that used waste from municipalities, branches and trees that storm damage, they pile them up somewhere. They can be used. The issue there is if they're not uniform size, they'll break down faster. So if you get a lot of leaves, a lot of small pieces, it'll break down faster and be effective sooner. But these are nice wood chips, and hopefully they'll last a long time. I guess with that, questions? Do you have any? Yes?
Have you done any early planting and tests, put the cover crops out earlier?
Well, planning on leaving 30 acres of the rye that I have seeded and harvesting that this summer. I guess it'll be harvested early mid-July. But with that, I've got a neighbor who's got 2 really good cattle manure, and I'm going to get his cattle manure. I thought we'd like to have a place to spread it. And then my goal is to put a multi-species cover crop out there early August. And then I will get, I think, really the maximum benefit from using the cover crop. It's a little bit harder in when you got a cash crop going out there. There are farmers that are trying to seed annual rye, which is a little different animal than the cereal rye, into V6 corn. Again, you have to be careful with herbicide you use, but that annual rye will germinate, but it goes dormant until you take your seed corn off or cut your silage or harvest your corn. But I know there's a number of farmers trying to do that. That would save the aerial application costs of the airplane, which is probably $15 an acre. Annual rye is maybe a little cheaper. You can go with a lower rate. You probably get that seed cost down to $10 an acre. But when the crop's harvested, that rye will express itself. Annual rye has a lot of benefits because the roots go a lot deeper, and they have a lot of benefits for soil quality. The issue this far north is it doesn't always hold the winter. So that's, I think Interstate 80 is kind of a dividing line between whether or not it works. Sometimes it might work, sometimes not. Cereal rye is pretty predictable, it'll hold the winter. But annual rye may or may not. But that's about all I know as far as seeding earlier. If you seed too early, again, the light is an issue. The light being the ground, being the cover crops. Yes, sir.
Is most of your focus on, first off, cereal rye and then planting corn into it? So I'm kind of intrigued by the soybean thing, because it seems like, in a conventional system, if we fly cereal rye into standing corn, it just seems like it might fit better. We don't have the fertilizer pass to worry about. We got a wider window in the spring to when we plant our soybeans, the weed control thing.
I think if you're going to pick one, that would be the one to pick. If you're going to do everything, you just want to pick a field, that would be the place to start. Because you get your experience using it. The termination is not the issue. You don't have that narrower window. My goal is to plant my beans into green rye and spray it. I think you need to get it sprayed within a few days. But if that rye were tall enough, you could use a roll of crimper. Rather than smooth roll, they have bands. Well, if you can break that stem, it will kill it. But it has to be pretty tall, and that means it's going to be later. And most farmers don't want to do it. But if you were happy to be organic, and you didn't want to use any herbicides, that is an excellent tool. And you got your weed control. So what we do is it's a series of compromises. What are our goals? Where do we want to be? So, but in a conventional system, I think seeding cereal rye into standing corn, and then having planting soybeans next year is an excellent place to start. And if you wanted to have cover crops on more acres, put the oats in your soybean fields for next year's corn. If you really want to cover everything. There's lots of options. I know, but we're going to hear more about those options after I'm done. Yes. 80% of it. have to spray that right away. My first year, I sprayed everything at once. I sprayed the whole 300 acres, corn and soybean field stuff. I terminated. But last year, I just done what was going to do with corn first, and then sprayed the other later.
You are stripping your beans, you're planting beans into the strip.
Yes. But my goal is to no-till that. I mean, I'm kind of shifting towards, you know, as a transition. But yes, I'm planting soybeans into strip till corn works nice.
Any other questions for Tim? Okay. All right. So the company theme for Osmond's Farm Supply is consulting clients with sustainable recommendations to maximize production. And I listened to a presentation like Tim just gave, and I really think that that is exemplary of what we're talking about there. It's about doing the right thing, but not sacrificing profitability or yield too. So I love listening to Tim talk. He's got a very practical, down-to-earth approach to things, and he's a farmer like the rest of us, so I think his knowledge is very valuable. So the second speaker today is Justin Fruechte from Millborn Seeds. We've been working with Justin for a few years now. He's been instrumental in developing a lot of our seed blends. I see you brought some examples
Life
here.
without.
Justin's been a great guy to work with. If we want to do a custom blend or something different, he's really good about that. He's tough with knowledge, and Millborn has always been willing to work with us on different things. Encourage you again, if you guys have questions, just feel free to raise your hand. We'll answer anything you got. Without any further introduction, I'll turn it over to Justin.
Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for the invite. I love coming down here because Osmos is, I mean, the people they have on staff is better than any other place that we work with in terms of wholesalers and dealers or co-ops or anything like that. So you're lucky to be in the area. I mean, I truly mean that. So first, I'm gonna show this video, and we developed this a couple weeks ago. And if you're familiar with Millborn marketing and stuff, you kind of understand that we like to have fun. We make things kind of quirky. We joke around a lot, and we keep the mood light. Okay. So this movie falls into the theme of that, and it as a cursor.
Life without bacon. Scary. Millborn cover crops? Not that scary. A dog that's not your best friend. Scary. Millborn cover crops? Not that scary. 27-yard field goal attempt. Scary. Millborn cover crops? Not that scary. Millborn cover crops. Intelligent formulations. Specialists who are with you every step of the way, making sure that planting cover crops are not that scary.
Funny. Any really good Vikings fans on the show? Yeah. I heard it still. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sweet. All right. Okay. Maybe we got a bigger hand. Right hand. Can we go full screen? Yeah, it is. Maybe it's this big. Or is that? Oh, it's still pretty big. The screen is pretty big.
Shouldn't make fun of the Vikings.
Yeah. There's those next year, right? Okay, cool. So we're gonna go through like just, I mean, the nitty gritty of it and get down to it. We'll start off just by talking about, why is there this buzz around it? Why are people talking about it? Why do we care? Okay, and then let's figure out your plan. Okay, I mean, everybody that's doing cover crops is learning at this, but really, what's gonna make sense in your operation? How do you make it work? Okay, so that's what we'll keep doing. Okay, this is who I am. That's my son Mason. We live near Ward, South Dakota, which is just north of Pipestone, Minnesota, about 18 miles. And I grew up there. I live 8 miles north of my home farm there, Folksville Farm. I got a brother who's farm still. We have livestock, cattle, and sheep. And then I guess my job is the forage and cover crop specialist for Millborn. Okay. Got 3 kids and a wife at home. And yeah, so I think when we start thinking about cover crops, that family thing comes into play, right? And we start talking about soil awareness and health, and that makes a lot of sense. But this is why, I think the soil health movement has become a big topic, and why the media has even grabbed it and ran with it. Number one, the land value is really high still. I mean, it's down from what it was maybe 2 years ago, but we know that there's not going to be any more earth to farm next year than what there is today. Okay? We only have so much land to take care of. Okay? So we better take care of it. The sun is free. Okay? If you write a balance sheet, that's the one input that you don't put a value on. Okay? That's a good thing. So if we can harvest that solar energy and use it for what it is and grow something from that free input, that's a really, really good thing. And Tim started talking about this just a little bit. The diversity in our system, okay? We are really, really lacking that. Big time. This was tall grass native prairie hundreds of years ago, okay? How many grasses and forbs did we have on the land then? Probably 30 different warm and cool season grasses that grew throughout that whole growing season. Probably another 20 to 50 different forbs in that ecosystem. Okay, so plant diversity was really, really big. Native forbs, legumes, grasses, cool and warm season grasses. And then think about what's going on below ground. In order to build that top 6 inches of black, good soil, that's what we need, that diversity factor, okay? All right, so if we're in a corn soybean situation, a rotation, we've got a warm season grass and a warm season broadleaf. That's 2 plant types. Anybody know Dwayne Beck from Fort Pierre? Couple guys, okay. His whole life has been dedicated in terms of into researching crop diversity, okay? And he's a huge advocate of no-till and a huge advocate of cover crops. But he talks about rotation, okay? And we've got to figure out that right rotation in order to build soil health, all right? So that's where cover crops come into play, because then we can build that rotation, get brassicas, get cool season broadleafs back on the plate again, all right? I think this slide is very important though too, because as farmers, as Viking fans, right, we like competition, okay? Talk about next year, that's what farmers always talk about. You're going to have higher yields next year. You're coming to these meetings because you care, because you want to improve your farm, you want to improve your operation, you want to leave that legacy. That's huge. Anybody a 2nd, 3rd, 4th generation farmer? Anybody a 5th generation farmer? 6th? 7th? 6th. That's huge. That's so cool. There's no other business in any other industry that's like that. Alright, that is so awesome. Okay, so we better have that coming up for the next generation. We better have our soil around here for the next couple generations. And the last point up there is we just like to watch things grow. Okay? That's why we look forward to spring. That's why we plant every year. It's awesome to go check fields, see that growing, you get that feel-good feeling going on. If you're raising livestock, there's nothing cooler than calving or lambing season. It's just awesome. Okay? Feels good. Okay. What has happened to acres? Okay, this is just a poll that was taken through the Sustainable Ag Coalition. Back in 2008, if you were planting cover crops, the average was about 125 acres you're putting on. 2013, they bumped that up to about 500 acres on that same farm, okay? All this is showing is that the people that were planting cover crops are continuing to do it, and they've increased the amount of acres that they're putting cover crops on, okay? So, there's not just people trying it and getting out of it, it's not just fad, it's working for them, and they're continuing to use it. I put this slide up here. I remember my grandpa planting sorghum, sedan grass, and turnips, and he'll tell me too that, they used to plant these green manure crops, okay? In an off year, or a dry year, or a year that maybe even fallow, especially in South Dakota, they put a crop out there just to retrieve nutrients, okay? if they were gonna put a green manure crop out there, they'd use forage sorghum, and then they'd just till it under in the fall, and it'd capture all that nutrients that that sorghum plant grew up and captured, and now it's your green manure. Okay. So it's nothing new, right? But that practice is still there. We're still doing some of the same things, okay? Now we just call it a cover crop. This is just, yeah, the nation that destroys its soil destroys itself, okay? Big, powerful quote. It means more now than it ever has. Okay, but here's what we're going to go through. And I think if you've ever worked with the NRCS on any of these cover crops, they make you point out what's your resource concern, okay? Why do you want to do a cover crop? Is it because you've read it, Progressive Farmer, or do you really want to achieve something with it? We're going to hit a lot on organic matter. Yes, we can alleviate some compaction. We'll probably fixate some nitrogen if we use legumes. Moisture management is huge now. Create and feed, those other two things, erosion control and weed suppression, okay? All right, here's organic matter. All right, so organic matter has to start from a living plant or a living animal, okay? It starts as a living organism right here. In our soil, we have about 5% of that, normally, okay? That then turns into fresh residue as it dies. As it starts to break down, we get that decomposing organic matter. That decomposing organic matter is what makes our soil, okay? As that starts to break down, though, we get this humus, okay? Humus is what builds aggregation within our soil. And this here is just a little, I don't know, whoops. I'm going to stand out here in a second. Okay, so here's organic matter and what it means to you, okay? It means a lot in terms of water infiltration and water's holding capacity. So if we want organic matter, that's a good thing. If we get more in our ecosystem, in our soil, we get more biology happening, right? If you have more food to eat, you're going to eat more food. Your friends are going to come over, they're going to eat more food. Same thing in your soil. If you get more food to eat, you get more biology. You get more living organisms in there, okay? When that happens, though, your rate of decomposition also increases, right? More people are eating the food, stuff starts to break down quicker. That's when we get those little better, bigger, more particle sizes within our soil, and that's aggregation. If you get more particle sizes in your soil, what can happen? Water goes down, right? It's not compacted. Right? Tim showed that picture of his soil up there. You look like Parmesan cheese. Lots of little pieces in there. Right? That's how water moves through the profile. All right, farm average is 1 to 6%. Whoa. Oh, Anna wants to do it. That's awesome. Okay, 1 to 6%. I always ask the question, is anybody over 6% for organic matter? No? Anybody under 1%? Nobody's going to raise their hand. A lot of 4s, okay, maybe a 5 in there. That's good soil, okay, we can farm that, that's great. But why it matters is if we can increase that by 1%, if we can go from 4% organic matter to 5%, that corn crop that next year is probably going to increase by 12%. Okay? So take 100 bushel corn and make it 112. If you can increase your organic matter from 4 to 5%. That 1% is worth a lot. If you put a fertilizer value on it, it's about $600 in nutrients. And that was done last year, maybe a little lower. The organic matter, okay, so a cover crop. Yes, we know that it increases organic matter because we have living roots, we got living residue. What does it mean in dollars and cents? Well, a good cover crop, which is 6 to 8 inches of growth, okay, you probably get that with cereal rye in the spring if you use that. Okay, that 0.1% will get, your cover crop will give you 0.1% organic matter, and that 0.1% is worth about $60 in nutrients. Kind of cool. Alright, here's how we do it with the species. Anybody heard of carbon to nitrogen ratio? Yeah. If you understand soil biology, you know what your carbon to nitrogen ratio is within species, okay? Grass species have a high carbon to nitrogen ratio, and it's a measure of fiber or cellulose content within that plant. Grasses are going to break down slower, right? Your corn residue hangs on longer than your bean residue. Corn has a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio. Okay, so if one of your goals in planting a cover crop is try to increase your organic matter levels, we probably need to have a grass species in that mix. So ryegrass and rye, of course, are up there, but oats, triticale is just a cross between rye and wheat. Millet is a warm season annual, and so is sedan grass or sorghum sedan grass. Warm season annual is that you can plant them in summer. Okay. Moisture management. I put this statement up here. Everybody think this is true? growing plant will use more water, right? Yeah, most times, okay. One of the biggest arguments in central or western South Dakota is, I'm not going to plant a cover crop because it's going to use too much moisture. You might not think that here because we want to use moisture, okay? So these studies were done, this is done in Pierre, and another slide is done in Bismarck here. But what it's showing is, this cover crop, if you have a cover crop on there, the soil moisture within that whole profile all the way up to 36 inches. With the cover crop, we had 3.36 inches of moisture. Without a cover crop, 3.22 inches. Okay? So we had a cover crop growing. Why do we have more moisture? Yeah, we're covering the soil. Okay? We lose a lot of moisture through wind erosion, through evaporation. Okay? So if we're covering that soil, we keep that soil temperature cooler. And so in the middle of summer especially, or late in the fall, you're actually holding on to more moisture. That's huge. The other thing is, we talk about having a cover growing in the spring. All right? And a lot of farmers will tell you this too, that are experienced cover croppers and love rye, cereal rye in the spring. That ground infiltrates water way better. Tim Shagan said yes. Okay? All right? These arrows, just think of these arrows as being ruts. Ruts allow water a pathway to follow down through the soil profile. Okay. No living cover on there. We get heavy rains in the spring, we get surface crusting. We get surface crusting, we get runoff. All right, 2012 was a huge dry year. Everybody understands that. What's this showing you is, once again, this is that Sustainable Ag Coalition that put on this survey. People that had cover crops in 2011 and then harvested their crop in 2012 had better yields. Okay, with the beans, they're close to 48, 46 and a half, 48. Without cover, down to 43. Okay, so 3 to 4 bushel increase on beans and about a 10 bushel increase on corn. So that's pretty cool. Even in a dry year, going into a dry year, the cover crop didn't affect the yields. All right, compaction. We understand what it is. Really what we're trying to do here, this is a cool story, I'm just going to talk on this slide. This guy planted radishes in a strip, or in a row, and then planted beans in a row, and he's going to come back and plant right on these radishes here. Okay? Really, this is on his end rows. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to alleviate the compaction there, okay? Radishes are probably the most common plant to do that with. Long, deep taproot. Other species that will do that though is canola, which is a brassica species. Ethiopian cabbage is very similar to that canola. Sunhemp, Turnip's a little bit different. Turnip will give you that big bulb that's in the first 3 inches of the soil profile and then have a longer taproot going down. But radishes, I mean, you can see how long that radish there is. It's probably 6 inches long. It really does go down in the profile. It does a great job of just loosening up that profile. Tim did a great job of nutrient retention. And this is just, there's 2 studies done. The first one that I cited there is through Indiana. And what they did is they just measured the amount of nitrate leaching where they did not have a cover crop and where they didn't have a rye cover crop. If they had a rye cover crop growing there was a 40% reduction in the amount of nitrates that leached through your profile. Same thing was done with a double cover crop, and they got the exact same results. 40% less nitrate. Okay. Nitrogen fixing. The only thing I want to touch on here is we have to have enough time for a nitrogen or a legume to grow to actually give you nitrogen. Okay. If it's late in the fall and you're going to fly on rye over corn, and you say, "Well, I want to fix some nitrogen too," and it's September or even end of August, it's probably not going to get done. Okay. Don't waste your money on putting a legume out there that's just going to winter kill and not give you nitrogen. Okay. But if it's end of July, or if you're going on early in the corn, we can put a legume in that system. If it flowers or we get 70 days of good growth, it'll form nodules. Okay. Any livestock producers here? Few. Okay. Are y'all planting cover crops right now? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Get them in your system if you're not. I mean, here's what we're doing with them. We don't want to be feeding cows in the winter. Obviously, right now we probably are. Before calves, we probably are. But the longer you can keep on the land, the better. Okay. That winter feed accounts for 70% of your feed costs in a year. Okay. That's your whole bill for the year. So here's a big advantage of grazing cover crops, and brassicas in general. Brassicas are your turnips and your radishes and your rape canola. The nutrition is extremely good, okay? You'll have food protein levels from 18 to 22% food protein, okay? In the fall, you don't have any other feed stuff that will match it. They will regrow, if they're allowed to, but the cold tolerance is awesome. They'll stay alive until it gets down into the upper teens, okay? A couple things just to watch though. Okay, if you got cows on the pasture, and it's September, October time, your quality of pasture is pretty poor, right? Your grass is brown, your quality of grazing is really decreasing. And you turn them on to something that looks like this, where it's just this lush green growth, they're going to get released, okay? It's a big change in their diet. So introduce them slowly to it, let them acclimate to it. And the number one thing is you've got to watch their dry matter intake. Okay? Cows have rumen for a reason. They've got to let that rumen work. Okay? And if it's all turnips and radishes out there, or green oats and stuff, there's no dry matter, there's no fiber in those plants. Okay? So it's all water and it just goes right through them. So you can either have access to some corn stalks if corn's cut already, let them go back and forth between the pasture that they're in, or bring some dry hay out there. I mean, throw a wheat straw bale out there and they'll pick at it. This year we made a big mistake. We worked cows and calves, and then we turned them back out on, it was just a lot of rape and turnips is what it was. And it had froze, okay? And we thought they'll be fine out there, and we let them go back into the pasture. Well, they weren't going back into the pasture, okay? And so their dry matter in that diet was very, very low. And they started, the cows started going down in condition, and they had chewed off all the grass rows, on the fence line. Grass rows around there. And we went, oh man, we're getting some hay, right? And we went out there with hay, they just devoured it. Okay, so they're missing that fiber in the diet, so they've got to have that. Okay, what it means in terms of dollars and cents, I think is a lot. If you're grazing corn stalks, if you're grazing your neighbor's corn stalk, the average rate is 70 cents to $1 per head per day. Okay? So if we use a conservative figure at 80 cents per head per day, and cover crops, okay, way better feed than corn stalks. 80 cents per head per day, we'll probably get about 45 days per cow per acre out there. Okay? With corn stalks, we'll get about 30. $36 an acre. That's pretty cool. Everybody, can you see the green out here? The leaves and stuff. Yeah. If you get snow on your cover crops, don't be afraid to, don't feel like you have to pull your cows and they'll go find it. There knows all the snow. You just take it out there. All of them. That's pretty fun sight. Okay. Putting them into action. So we'll go through just a couple different scenarios here. If it's an August planting, anybody planting wheat this year? Oats. Oats? Anybody else planting oats? Or sweet corn? Okay. All right. We can get that crop off early enough that we can have a cover crop back in August, probably, or end of July. If that's the time, we can do some really great things with cover crops. Okay. We can go in with 5, 6, 7 species mixes. Have a brassica in there. Have a legume in there to fix your nitrogen, and you'll get a foot to 2 foot of growth on that cover crop. That's the easiest situation. Just drill it in way over your old stubble, and it'll take off and it'll grow, and it'll do really good. Okay. And according to soybean location, and this is by far the hottest topic in terms of how to cut crop right now, this is where it gets trickier. Okay, so we're just going to break it down into 2 different parts, either an early season part or a late season part. When I say early, this is just on corn. Okay, we're not doing any beans. Early into corn is going to be about this stage on corn, B6 to B8 stage. Right? So at this time, you can either use a high voice spinner spreader. You can maybe mix it with urea if you're top dressing at that time. There's companies coming out with these other drills this is called Penn State cover crop interceders. They're driving directly into the corn at this stage and planting the cover crop. Okay. This shows, I took a picture where they had left a strip. They planted a cover crop with a cover crop interceder on the left, and on the right they did not. That cover crop interceder is really cool. Okay, you can see the clearance on it, but what it it does is it drills 3 rows right next to each other, in between each corn row. Okay? So rather than broadcasting it, this is a better method. You know, if you don't get a rain, you know what's in the ground, it's going to germinate. If we're broadcasting it, we got to get a rain. And we usually do, and it usually always comes, okay? But this makes it just a little bit more secure, I guess. So this is a new method, okay? In the last couple of years, people have tried it. We've had okay success. But everybody questions it because, number one, you don't want to affect your corn yield, right? Corn cash crop is your biggest cash crop of the year. You better make sure that you don't lose a bushel just by planting a cover crop. Okay? So a lot of studies were focused on this. And South Dakota State did a really good job of putting a study together. Penn State did a good job of putting a study together. And in all of their results, is if you had a diverse mixture, besides just one species of the grass, you will never have a negative effect on your corn yield. Okay? You won't steal nutrients or moisture by having a cover crop, and it's not going to affect your corn yield. Now, if you just put annual ryegrass or cereal rye in at V6 target of your corn crop, that did hurt your corn yield. Okay? Which makes sense. If you understand rotations, we've got a grass and a grass growing together, and they're going to like the same things and compete for the same things, okay? But if you've got diversity back in that system, it's not going to affect that corn crop. They're not going to compete against each other.
So what could you interseed that's going to be shade tolerant then, besides the annual right?
Man, you have 2 questions. Something like this, okay, it has to be shade tolerant. That's the key, okay? Because it's going to be in there underneath the canopy all of August and into the first part of September, really, before it foliates. Things that are shade tolerant, annual ryegrass is up there, okay? You can see annual ryegrass down in that picture. Many little grasses. Dwarf Essex rapeseed is one that I really like. It's a brassica species, just like a radish. Crimson clover is probably the most shade tolerant clover or legume that you plant, and then radishes are actually really shade tolerant. Okay? We started doing this 3 years ago. Radish was a species that said, it has poor shade tolerance, don't use it for this. Well, we put it in these systems, and radish always does really good. So it's cool, because it's popular, people want to plant it. Okay, so this is just like our high-fly mix. Okay, you could do a variable plan similar to this, but those 4 things are the shade tolerant when they do work. Okay, and it goes on about 15 pounds per acre if you're broadcasting it over the corn. About a week after this, and then plant your beans again. Okay. It probably is. Crimping will work if it joins. Okay, so if like oats or wheat, you get that knuckle on the stem, and the stem will be pretty stiff. When you joint, then great, here you have this glue stick. Yep, and then if it crimps it, it'll be dead, and it won't regrow. If it's not jointed though, and it's too vegetated and young, crimping it won't kill it usually. It has to crush that stem to kill it. Talking just a little bit on terminating or killing it right. Obviously, here's your 3 options. You can graze it this spring. Probably not going to kill it by grazing it because it'll just keep on coming. You can hay it, you can mow it. Spraying it is probably the easiest thing to do, especially if you know you're coming back into the corn study rotation. There's been changes in terms of crop insurance. You can definitely insure your crop after a rye. Cover crop's been on it. There's no issues with that. And all that RMA says, and I think we're in zone 3 still here, is that rye has to be dead at or before planting the cash crop. Okay. Now what Tim's doing is exactly right. If you're planting corn, make sure that rye is dead at least a week before you're planting it. Okay. Corn likes nitrogen as it's growing faster, right? Rye is a great scavenger of nitrogen, and it's also a great holder of nitrogen. Okay? So that rye's going to hold on to nitrogen, and a lot of times we'll see it if we're short on nitrogen in the system, and that plant's growing really, really fast in the spring, that rye will hold it, and you'll see it. Your corn will be stunted in the spring. Okay? So if we get tight on space there, and for some reason we plant corn, we didn't get the rye sprayed off, make sure you've got a starter fertilizer with your corn. Okay? It's going to need it. And just to reiterate it, temp and time of day is huge for the spraying around. Okay, it dies at roundup. There's no tolerance to roundup whatsoever. But we've got to make sure that that plant's actively taking it up. The other thing, yeah, like I mentioned, the regrow's really good. So if you're rolling it, make sure it's hit the maturity point to where it's jointed, and then you can crimp it and it dies. Okay. This is just a really cool radish plant that I found. I had to take a picture. Kind of hard. So that's it. Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
When you planted that early season mixture,
Yep.
and then you were gonna come back and plant corn, what were you using for? Any strip till, spring strip till?
Like the high fly ones.
Yeah.
You can strip till through that, no problem. No problem.
Did you strip in the fall or try to do it in
Yes.
the spring?
Yes, you can do it in the spring or the fall, either way.
You haven't done studies on that, it's worked out.
I haven't done any studies on it, but I've seen people do it. And I think I was kind of a little bit nervous about it early on, because we've got a lot of growth. And even with, Bill can kind of attest to this too, when there was a prevent plant acres here, it's like 3 years ago now, 3 years ago now, people were stripping into that, and we said, well, I think it'll work. But we really didn't know. And that was probably the first test of it, because we had a lot of growth on those cover crops, because they were planted in August, and they're huge jungles, huge radishes, and the strips worked out good. They really did. So I don't think the amount of cover crop will affect how your fall strip till will work. I don't think it will affect it at all. The ground is so mellow at that time, and you got all the roots, and the green material also isn't. It breaks down so easy. You can cut through it really, really easy. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Are guys gonna graze it at the same time if they're gonna strip it? How does that affect the strip? Say you're doing both.
You're trying to do both. Well, I would just raise it in the fall, and then I'd just do a spring pass and strip it if you get it. Grazing I don't think it's going to affect your strip if you did strip till it first. In the fall. No. Especially if you do it late. I mean, there's going to be instances if we get a really wet fall or something, I wouldn't want off there grazing. Because then I think your strip will be mudded up and trampled and stuff. But if we're froze out and stuff, I would definitely go graze it after your strip. You're not going to see anything happen on strip.
So in 13, we had all the prevent plant acres around here, and I started working with Justin, and he gave me a mix, and it had millet in it, right? I think that's what we started with, and I'm like, oh, these guys, they don't want sorghum Sudan grass or Proso millet that's this tall, and they're gonna freak out. We need this to break down. So when we substituted in some annual ryegrass, we came up with this nutrient builder mix, which works excellent. But I strip tilled into some of that, and the next spring, where I strip tilled into it in May, I couldn't tell where the cover crop was and where the strip was because the cover crop had broken down so completely. So, it's the same way. I'm like, what am I going to do with all this residue? I mean, it's beautiful. It's knee-high, lush radishes, lots of grass out there, but I almost wish it would have had more carbon out there, looking back at it. But I was a little bit freaked out, and I think a lot of other farmers had the same concern with having too much of that carbon or leaking out there and breakdown. So.
Yeah, what do you go, especially like on wheat, right? Usually we're trying to break down some of that wheat residue a little bit faster. Well, cover crop can really do that, especially brassicas. That should turn up in rate. You'll break down that wheat residue a lot faster with cover crop.
You get more biological action or more cover crops there. So what's above ground is actually being eaten up by what's below ground because you got there to feed.
Yeah, exactly.
It goes hand in hand.
If you were gonna drill versus aerial tie in the soybeans, how much do you think you could come back and see?
That's a great question. I know people have done half a bushel. I don't know how think you want it in spring too. Half a bushel would get you a nice cover though. Okay. With the drill though, also you're going to have open spaces, you're going to rows. Yeah, right. It tillers so much. That one spear turns into a 6-inch bush.
seeding into the B6 or 8 corn,
Yeah,
then obviously, I mean, you want to be, your herbicide program after that is on mute.
yeah, it is. And you gotta watch your breeds, big time. And it's tricky. A lot of people are just, I mean, don't sacrifice your chemical program to plant a cover crop, okay? I'll tell everybody that, always. If you got a water depth issue or a kochia issue on the field, don't pull all your pre-emerges, just plant the chemical, or just plant the cover crop, because you'll pass on. Okay? So, pick the right field, plant the cover crop. Don't use the pre, use, a couple more passes around it, one more pass around it, right before you plant. Interseed your cover crop. Once it's off and going, you're probably not going to have a weed issue that'll be there because we're close to canopy. The corn's growing so fast, and it's not going to hit it.
Can you get any seeds into that B5 seed that will for winter? Because the list you had, right?
Right.
Is there any that are shade tolerant enough that you can get them over?
Yeah, so we can use perennials in that situation. So people have used like white clover, they're both perennial, they're biennials. I'm not going to say golden hardiness is perfect, but that would be the one thing to look at if you want that. Yeah, we've done a little bit of that.
But camelina.
Winter camelina, yeah, we'll have that this year. We'll play with it too. Camelina was it, yeah. Up in NDSU, they use it a lot up there. It's supposed to be a very, very winter hardy brassica species. Okay, so now it's saying like a rapeseed, very similar to rapeseed, oilseed crown. Plant that in the fall, get growth just like rye, and then it comes back in the spring. So that would be hard. Yeah.
You mentioned the interseed mix that was rated 15 pounds per acre. What's the cost of that mix?
$23 an acre.
That's
The whole mix, yeah. The high fly one.
Justin, we did a lot of seeding this last year, and we had a little bit of inconsistency.
Mhm.
I don't think it was application, but it seemed like some side hills maybe did come better than some other areas of the field. There's some tips when we're using a plane as far as timing, or we just need to really be relying on weather patterns. What's the secret to success there? Maybe Tim, you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know if anyone has a secret. Okay, Tim brought up a good point. We better manage it like we're planting in the spring. Okay, watch your rain is probably the most important factor. Okay, I don't know if I'd go broadcast if there isn't a rain in the forecast because we've got to catch that rain on it in order to germinate right away. So there's one thing. It's not going to be a perfect look and feel if we're broadcasting. Okay, the cover crop isn't going to look like your corn when you look down the road and you've got perfect emergence and the rows are clean. We've got to change our way of thinking just a little bit on the cover crops, okay? We're still learning about it, number one, okay? So there's going to be some errors in the field and it's not going to be a solid map. But maybe just a couple plants in this part of the field is okay, even though it's really, really thick in this part of the field. Yeah, we want it to be uniform and we want it to look good when you're driving by. But the benefit of just having something growing there is still really, really good, I think. So maybe perfection isn't perfect. What's that? Well, if it's completely dry, it can lay there for a very long time. I'm not going to say forever, but years. Okay, if it never gets any moisture. The problem is if we get little tiny bits of moisture or even dew, and it starts to swell, but then it runs out of gas and it doesn't have enough moisture to set it up. Take off. Yeah. Sam, go ahead. Okay.
Tim had mentioned some people are mixing cover crops in with their dry fertilizer. What's something you recommend, I guess, when you go out in the fall fertilizing for corn?
Yeah.
And then I guess if you chisel plow it, might get to be, some of it might get to be a little bit deep.
Mhm.
Wondering if you've ever heard of much of that or
Yeah.
any ideas?
Yep. So if it's in the fall like that, I would still just use rye. Okay? Because it's just gonna hang out there in the fall, come up in the spring. Anything else that we plant, we can get it to come, but we're probably not seeing the whole big benefit of the radish, okay? Late in the fall, when we're getting 2 or 3 inches of growth out of it, we're not getting a big half root. The rye is gonna give you more roots because of the growth in the spring, so stick with rye in that application. It can get too deep, okay? It really can. It probably can't grow, it can't get on the ground if it's over 2.5 inches deep in the ground, okay? And if you're gonna chisel it, I think, you'll still get some that come, okay? You'll bury some too deep, but a lot of it will still be in that 2-3 inch range and they will come. So I would still do it, I guess, even if you're chiseling it.
I know a fellow put a brick Gandy box on his disc chisel, and I'm not sure what place it was, but probably behind the shakes. That soil is loose and mellow and moist, it's gonna go to.
Salford makes we got a Salford vertical till, yeah, right, 2 years now. And they make an attachment, they make a cover crop seeding attachment specifically for a machine that has that.
Yeah, that one sits on front, right? And then,
That looks neat, I think.
yeah.
You go on your bean stubble early, and the problem we have is we're putting our hydroson with it, so we want to kind of try to stay later,
Oh, yeah, you really good.
but I look pretty interesting, I saw it at a farm show, I look pretty interesting.
I was gonna ask about predation, that seed lays out there.
Oh, yeah.
If you're not tilling your soil, you have a lot of earthworms, there's probably 15 earthworms per cubic foot, so if you've got 20 rye seeds above there, last fall I started looking, my standing corn, where the lower leaves had died, the earthworms are pulling those leaves into the ground. So they really do recycle. And I know my bean field, I thought worked all the corn stalks from last year, I just couldn't find it. And there's a lot of activity going on there. After you get this going 3 or 4 years, 2 or 3 years, you got a whole system working underneath, and it's best just to leave it alone.
Yeah.
It works real good.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that brings up a whole other topic, but of how we've gotten more in tune with ourselves, I think cover crops have been a great catalyst for us to focus on things like that, okay? So we're planting in the fall, we're going on our checking the fields, we're seeing things like earthworm activity, and so we're starting to change the way we think just a little bit about ourselves as a whole ecosystem, and I think that's great. I mean, that's why soil health is a big topic right now. Cool, well, thank you very much.